Is there more droughts? No. Is there melting of the North Pole? Yes, but it's been going on for 200 years. So that's 100 years before, maybe even 150 years you can claim, before any realistic industrialization. And by the way, the Antarctic is at its greatest extent for the last couple of hundred years. So whereas the Arctic may be melting a little bit, it's a natural phenomenon. And this is a really, really important point because it's prior to industrialization. And the Antarctic is getting larger. You don't hear about that in the news very often. Are there glaciers melting? Yes, but they, once again, because they've been monitored in places like the Alps, they used to have exorcisms. They used to bring the priests out, the heretics. The heretic in this case is the glacier. So they'd bring the priests out and they would try to get God to push the glacier back because it was about to hit the village. So they've marked with crucifixes. So they have a long history. And yes, they've shown that the glaciers have been retreating for over 200 years.
Nothing to do with
nothing to do with carbon dioxide, obviously. Okay, so that's the general climate. And the other issue you were talking about was
the extinction of the rate of species extinction definitely seems to be proceeding at a much faster rate. Some people are saying it's more than 200 times the background extinction rate. And the examples given, of course, are fish and very simple ones like cod in the North Sea. When I was a child, we had plentiful amounts of cod in the North Sea.
Right.
And now it's very, very hard to get such plentiful amounts. It's a very, very simple example. But according to the different species that we're looking at around the world, it definitely does seem that something is going on in the biological world that may or may not be connected to climate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And since you were involved in the biological sciences, I wonder if you had any comment on that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we did very interesting experiments with fisheries and population size. And a little factoid I find interesting is once actually population gets below a certain threshold, it totally collapses. There's a lot of interest in this whole concept, and what less is less caught because we're overfishing. And I deeply believe we're overfishing. But however, I would consider that a completely different issue of mismanagement of our resources. But in terms of the extinction rate increasing, I will believe you if you tell me it's the case, but I actually don't think, I've never heard of that being true in the case. And there are extinctions all the time, and there's evolution all the time. And it's a lot more rapid than we would have been told as, from our original textbooks. We know that extinctions of species is very common, and evolution of new species is very common. And, you have the theory of evolution and Darwinianism is, some people will say it doesn't exist. Well, I think it does exist, but it's actually a lot more complex story.
Much more complex.
Humans are evolving at a phenomenal rate. We're having problems with our wisdom teeth, which may be, you tell me if you're an anthropologist, but I only think only maybe a couple of thousand years ago we never had these problems. Our jaws are getting smaller because we're getting more and more processed food. So this evolution is a lot more rapid than a pure survival of the fittest. Now there's been examples, for instance, there's a study in Sweden, this is from my university days, so it's quite a long time ago. There's a study in Sweden showing that mothers during famine, so this is a couple hundred years ago, the records in the church records, they could show that the children were smaller if they were being in gestation during a famine. Now that's evolution at a generational level. So our genes, our makeup, our DNA can actually be altered. There are signals within the process that will be altered within a generation to adapt to the environment.
That's called epigenetics, and it's getting a lot of focus right now. That's another very heretical idea, because of course the idea that evolution is entirely programmed by DNA itself is coming under the spotlight now. That the environment, which is not just the air, the water, the temperature, but the environment of our own thinking, the environment of our belief structures, how we think about reality in general can actually affect the evolutionary movement within humanity, is getting a lot more attention. I am 50-50 about climate crisis. The more I speak to people like you, the more I'm open to the idea that it's not so much a crisis as it is an evolutionary opportunity. I find it very hard to believe that our leaders are that witless that they do not understand the data, that they are ignorant. We were here earlier, we talked about this earlier. They are aware that this is a setup, that this data is not what it's cracked up to be, that there is an agenda. And of course here all the conspiratorialists will come in with all the multiple conspiracy theories from 9/11 onwards, if you think that was a conspiracy theory, for example. And it all leads to one conclusion, which is there are a bunch of people in the world who know something that we don't. They've got an agenda that we are not aware of, and they're moving towards a particular end point in their game. Is it something that is an agenda, that's a conscious agenda?
Well, that comes back to our previous topic, which is whether the Barack Obamas, Gordon Browns, and Kevin Rudds of this world are ignorant of the fact that the evidence they're touting is very tenuous, i.e. there isn't any global warming, or, as I strongly said, malicious, or shall we say a hidden agenda, have a hidden agenda. Well, I find it hard to believe that they would be totally ignorant. It's possible. So that is possible. The alternative if they have a hidden agenda, well, what is it? What is the hidden agenda? Well, emissions trading is the biggest tax, as we've already said, that you could ever imagine. We're talking trillions, and that's just conservative value. And what it means is, if it was run by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is what the idea is eventually, to have a global emissions trading scheme, that is the UN. And the UN have always been beholden to the United States for funding, which they hate, because the United States is a vested interest. So now the UN will have its own direct source of income, a massive source of income, and be given the economic control to influence world energy production and trade. Now, in the actual document they wanted to sign at Copenhagen, it did actually talk about this government.
I have read that treaty, and what it says is this, that a world government is going to be created. The word government actually appears.
Now we're talking about a world government, and nowhere in the document, and Lord Monckton says he read every single page, and he can say, and he put his hand on his heart, and I'm only quoting what he said, did it ever say would be elected? So we're handing over control of our democracies to an unelected government. And this has been the dream for many people in the socialist field for a long time. So emissions trading potentially could be the progenitor of a world government. And maybe a world government would be good for us someday. But I don't think we are a level playing field. I don't think even the people in France versus the people in Germany, let alone the people in France versus the people in Vietnam, want to have the same rules and regulations and be told by some faceless person how to rule and how to live your life, how to generate electricity, how to have your civilization. So I think it's a dangerous concept. Maybe in the future, when we're this evolved super being, a world government of a benevolent, essentially dictatorship would work. But I do not see that happening. It's non-elected. It's based largely, as far as I can see, on the European Union, which is a non-elected government. There are European members of parliament, but the people who actually run it is a bureaucracy, non-elected, and they are actually dictating the lives hugely of all the Europeans. They control so many things, including the shapes of bananas, whether they can be curved or straight. Do we hear about it? Do we know about it? No. We are told these things. And this European Union, which, by the way, has an emissions trading scheme, so it already has this bureaucratic mechanism in place, is pretty much, as far as I could see, I would suppose. I mean, this is theory, this is wacky stuff, but I've thought about this quite a lot, if you're assuming that there is not mass ignorance in the whole of the political lobby, and there is some sort of actual intelligence, then this is where we're heading. And the European Union would be a framework for this potentially new world government.
Yes, I agree with you. I don't agree with a lot of conspiracy theories which posit that a bunch of real evil people have got it in for the rest of us and they want to control us. I don't believe it. However, in my younger years, I was more interested in conspiracy theories and I had more of a belief in them. In fact, I used to criticize the Trilateral Commission all the time. And as you know, the Trilateral Commission is one of the most powerful bodies on the planet.